If you're ready to elevate your leadership performance, build long-term resilience, and develop a sustainable strategy for executive longevity, I invite you to book an executive longevity strategy call with me. Together, we'll create a personalized roadmap to help you lead with greater clarity, energy, and impact. And if you're looking for ongoing education, resources, and a community of leaders committed to sustainable high performance, I invite you to join the executive longevity community. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Longevity Unlocked. I'm Sherrie Austin, registered nurse and executive longevity and performance advisor. And this podcast is for leaders who refuse to trade their health, clarity, or decision quality for success. Here's what we do differently. We don't talk about hustle. We don't chase optimization for optimization's sake. And we don't wait for burnout to intervene. This is where we examine the physiology behind leadership, how sleep, stress, nutrition, movement, and recovery directly shape cognitive capacity, emotional regulation, and long-term decision quality. Because the truth is, most leadership risk doesn't come from lack of skill or intelligence. It comes from quiet capacity erosion. You know, the kind you normalize because nothing is technically broken. Each episode is designed to help you think more clearly under pressure, lead with greater range and resilience, and build a longevity strategy that protects both your performance and your future self. If you're a high-performing leader who knows there's more available, more clarity, more energy, more strategic depth, you're in the right place. Let's unlock it. Let's talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load is the total amount of mental effort your brain uses to process information, make decisions, solve problems, and manage competing demands at any given time. And in executive leadership, excessive cognitive load can reduce strategic clarity, impair judgment, and make even routine decisions feel unnecessarily difficult. So let's talk about why leaders confuse being busy with being effective. Simple. We live in a hustle culture. So and we're rewarded for that. So if you are constantly on emails at 1:00 in the morning, if you're constantly attached to your phone, if you never take a break, people just assume, hey, they're doing good here. But let's not confuse being busy with being effective. And see, your KPIs tell the tale. You could be busy doing a lot of things, but are you moving the needle in the direction you personally and your organization wants to go? And let's talk about strategic clarity. Strategic clarity is the ability to clearly identify what matters most, make aligned decisions, and direct attention, energy, and resources toward the actions that produce the greatest impact. And see, that's the difference. Because you could be busy, but you're not efficient. And if your strategic clarity is compromised by excessive cognitive load, like I said, KPIs tell the tale. So let's talk a little bit more about cognitive load. And cognitive load is the amount of mental effort being used to process information, make decisions, and manage competing demands at any given time. And we have to remember that the brain is finite. It's not a supercomputer. It's not an AI agent. It's not Chat, Claude, Gemini, or any of those. So it's finite. So it has a limited capacity workspace for holding and using information. So when too much information competes for that space, your comprehension and your decision quality declines. This leads to attention residue, which is the mental carryover that remains after moving from one task to another. A lot of times, and I talked about this in previous episodes, that's why I said it's important to close out loops, because as long as we have open loops, our brains, it's like a hunter. It's constantly hunting for information, hunting for the next thing, because they actually use information to interpret an outcome. So because and your brain will typically default to the familiar, it's hunting for that familiarity. So if you have open loops, all you have is residual carryover. So you're going from this meeting to talk about hiring decisions, to talk about capital allocation, to come up with travel stack plans. And all that residue from task switching also, it just lingers in the brain. So although you've switched tasks physically, part of your attention still remains on that previous task that you were doing. And that's because the loop was open and you did not effectively close that loop. This leads to decision fatigue. And decision fatigue is a decline in decision-making efficiency that may occur after repeated or demanding choices. Research has debated, but sustained decision demands clearly contribute to mental strain and reliance on shortcuts. Because like I told you, the brain is going to defer to the familiar. And if you have excessive cognitive load, that means you're already stretched. So you're already in invisible urgency. You know, the little firefighter is coming up in the brain. And now, now let's just get this quick. Let's do this quick. You don't have tolerance for ambiguity. So you're not thinking clearly. Your strategic clarity is diminished when you're cognitively overloaded. And then, like I said, the context switching, moving repeatedly between tasks, conversations, platforms, and priorities. And then in the middle of meetings, you're constantly interrupted with emails or Slacks or just different kind of notifications that interrupt your previous task. So we have to realize that each switch requires the brain to disengage, reorient, and rebuild focus. And again, your brain is not an AI agent, so it can't do that appropriately. All right, let's get into some research. John Sweller's cognitive load theory talks about working memory has limited capacity, which I just mentioned because it's a finite organ in the body. So when demands exceed the capacity, learning, reasoning, and performance suffer. And then Daniel Kahneman's decision-making research stated that under pressure or depleted attention, people are more likely to rely on fast, automatic thinking instead of slower, more deliberate analysis. And like I said, we have to remember that the brain is going to always defer to the familiar. And when you're deferring to the familiar and you don't have tolerance for ambiguity, that is a silent indicator that you're already operating in urgency, that the little firefighters are about to jump up and start taking out some fires. And a lot of people, because it's so, what is the word I want to use? It is so slightly imperceptible that you don't really notice it. So it's one of these invisible signals that you have to be cognizant of. And then there's Roy Baymeister's decision fatigue research, which says repeated decision-making may reduce persistence and increase impulsive avoidant choices, although later research has challenged how universal and substantial this effect is. So let's talk about that for a minute. And this is where we start talking about decision quality and decision fatigue. And that's really what he's talking about there, you know, and that's why I talk about that a lot, about simplifying our choices, meal prepping instead of thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner every day, having systems in place. When you have systems in place, it reduces decision fatigue and decision friction because you're decreasing the amount of decisions that you have to make. So let's talk about how overload quietly reduces executive performance. Cognitive overload does not always appear as a dramatic breakdown. And like I said, it's one of these invisible, barely imperceptible things that occur that if you're not cognizant of it, you won't notice it. Like in my time working in the ICU, usually persistent headaches a lot of times is a sign of high blood pressure. But a lot of times people will think, oh, I just have migraines. And if you have a history of migraines, it's also been shown that doctors will just defer to a familiar diagnosis. Oh, well, they have a history of migraines. It's just migraines. When in actuality, it could be high blood pressure. And usually they'll check your blood pressure. And even if your blood pressure is normal, it's still advisable to get a CT of the head because something could be going on neurologically that's giving little signals that an impending stroke is going to occur. But we tend to overlook that. So it's not dramatic. And these are some signs that will let you know that you're probably in some type of cognitive overload. It looks like delayed or avoided decisions. And I'm currently in that. I recognize that in myself. And when I am, I start questioning myself why. Usually it's because it's a task I don't want to do. Let's just be honest. And a lot of people, that's what it is. And it's usually a task I don't want to do because it brings out some type of stressful emotion that at the time I'm not ready to deal with or I don't want to deal with. Lately, I've been going through that. I have some things going on and I know that I've been delaying it. So what I do is I just do one little thing. I break it up into very small chunks so that it's more digestible to me because I know it's not something that I really want to do. A lot of times you become reactive rather than strategic. Again, that's another sign that you're operating in urgency. You have zero tolerance for ambiguity. You start reacting at the slightest little thing. When you have tolerance for ambiguity, you're not rushing to make a decision. You become curious. Oh, I wonder why that's occurring. I wonder if we do A, B, and C, if X, Y, and Z will occur. But when you're already under cognitive load and cognitive strain, you just want to get it over. And again, I utilize strategies in order to combat that. Like I said, I'll start chopping that thing down into super small pieces, coming up with a system to deal with it. And especially if it's something that I have to take care of. Or I'll actually address myself in that moment. I'll take a strategic nap before I do it. I'll do a cognitive reset before I engage in the task so I can clear up some cognitive load. Difficulty identifying the true priority. And that happens a lot. And of course, we are, a lot of times as adults, we don't realize it, but we want to operate in our id. That's the pleasure principle. So because we want to operate in that, we don't want to have to make the difficult decisions or do the difficult thing, or what I like to say, adult. But actually as leaders adult. So we have to, when we notice that we are operating in pleasure principle and we don't want to make that decision and we are negating what the priority is, we probably need to take a step back and ask ourselves why. We have reduced creativity and problem solving because we just want to get it done. I don't want to deal with this. So what's the quickest way to just get it off my desk? Not is it the most effective thing to do. It's just, I just want to get rid of it. And because of that, you end up having more errors, missed details, impulsive decision-making, and excessive reliance on familiar solutions. Mental exhaustion despite limited visible progress. The hidden cost is not simply feeling tired. It is the gradual erosion of judgment, strategic clarity, and executive and execution quality, often before the executive recognizes that their cognitive capacity has been compromised. And that's why I said they're very imperceptible. And if you're not aware of it, you can't manage it. So what are the hidden costs of the disproportionately high cognitive load? Like we discussed earlier, poor strategic decisions. You're operating in urgency. You want to get it over. So, hey, let's just get this thing over. So we're not thinking about the long term. And a lot of times when leaders are under fire, they think in quarters, not decades. And that's the purpose of executive longevity, so that you can have sustained leadership where it's sustained for decades. Because quarters is nothing. That's the short game. You want to be in it for the long haul. It leads to increased errors, emotional exhaustion, slower innovation. You're not very creative when you're overloaded. Reduced executive presence. And see, that's a more visible, louder sign that you're operating in urgency when your team and your organization is starting to give you the look, or they're starting to make succession plans behind your back. There begins to be communication breakdown because you want to get it over, so you don't have time to have meetings about it and go through the appropriate channels. There's a lot of team confusion because they're not quite sure what you need. So here's a question. What is cognitive overload costing your organization that isn't showing up on the balance sheet? I know for me, it cost me and my company a lot of revenue and diminished vision because I was so overloaded. I was in stage 11 of the 12 stages of burnout. So I was right at the cusp of burnout. And when you're at almost at the cusp of burnout, again, you can't forecast the future. So you're just thinking in the now, you're just being urgent and everything is urgent. So you're unable to qualify what's a priority and what's not a priority. And it really affects the bottom line. But a lot of times that's when leaders and organizations realize it. So let's talk about some case studies and how clarity creates momentum. Let's look at two recognizable examples of how reducing complexity can strengthen strategic clarity and transform organizational performance. So this case study is about Apple and Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company had an overcrowded product portfolio and lacked a clear strategic direction. Rather than continuing to add more products, what Jobs dramatically did was he simplified Apple's offerings. He organized the company's product strategy around a simple 4-quadrant model: consumer and professional products with desktop and portable options for each. Projects that did not support those priorities were discontinued. And this simplification accomplished more than reducing the number of products. It decreased organizational cognitive load. Teams gained greater clarity about where to focus their attention, resources, and creative energy. So instead of spreading talent across competing initiatives, what Apple did was concentrate its efforts on fewer products with greater potential. The result was stronger alignment, faster execution, and the strategic focus that helped support Apple's turnaround. So here's the leadership takeaway: clarity creates momentum. When leaders identify what matters most and eliminate what does not, teams can move with greater confidence, consistency, and speed. And that's what I was saying: simplification in systems. And that's what decreases cognitive load. In case study number 2 was Microsoft and Satya Nadella. When Satya Nadella became Microsoft CEO in 2014, the organization faced internal competition, fragmented priorities, and a rapidly changing technology landscape. So what Nadella did was introduce a clear strategic direction centered on cloud computing, collaboration, and growth mindset. The growth mindset philosophy encouraged employees to move away from protecting their expertise and toward learning, curiosity, and cooperation. And this shift helped reduce the cognitive and organizational friction created by competing agendas. Teams had a more unified understanding of the company's direction and could align their decisions with shared priorities. With clear direction, Microsoft accelerated innovation, strengthened collaboration, and expanded its leadership in cloud-based technology. So here's the leadership takeaway: clear direction accelerates innovation, and innovation does not always require more ideas. Sometimes it requires fewer competing priorities and a clearer signal about where the organization is going. So together, these examples demonstrate an important principle: strategic clarity is not created by doing more, it is created by reducing unnecessary complexity, aligning people around what matters, and directing organizational capacity towards the work that produces the greatest impact. Again, simplification in systems. So I'm going to talk about my personal story. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I was an invisible burnout. So there was no creation, no creativity. I just wanted to get things done. And how I was able to turn it around and how I changed it was the habits. I really doubled down on being intentional about my recovery infrastructure. I was lacking sleep, which is foundational. My nutrition has always been good, but it was getting a little slippery. I was depending on a lot of caffeinated products to stay awake and a lot of sleep aids to go to sleep. I didn't have an anchored routine. I was burning the candle at both ends. And because of that, I missed a lot of opportunities because I was just burnt out. I was tired. So this is what happened, and these were the measurable improvements. So what I did was I started, like I said, with my sleep. And that's still a challenge for me, but it's gotten a lot better. So one, I re-engaged my circadian rhythm because at the time as I was building, I was also working night shifts at the hospital. And so I was going against my circadian rhythm. So I would be working all night at the hospital, working all day at home on the business, and there was little sleep in between. So once I stopped traveling, I moved back home where my focus could be predominantly on the business. I instantly started having um, anchored wake times, wake routines, and bedtime routines because my schedule is still fluid because I do still work, not as much, but I do. And because there is still some traveling involved in my schedule, it's hard for me to have an anchor uh, wake time and sleep time because I don't go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. So I try to keep those routines. I try to get up with the first in the morning with the sun and do a cognitive reset to reset my to reset my circadian rhythm. Then the next thing I started doing was doing the three priority framework. I would actually brain dump what I had to do for the week, and then what was the timelines, and then what was the three priorities I was focusing on for that day and that day only. And that also decreased my decision fatigue, increased my decision quality, because like I said, I got to the point where I realized that certain things I just didn't want to do. So I would be delaying and avoiding because it just wasn't fun or it was challenging for me. Getting into business, that's not, it was a little bit different from being at the bedside in a more clinical setting. So there was a lot of challenges that I faced doing the crossover into business. So the brain dump really helped me in just actually plotting out my timelines and saying, okay, these are the three priority things that I must do today. Then I started decision batching and having non-negotiable times. I started looking at my patterns. I feel better in the morning, so I make my strategic decisions in the morning. If I have to make a strategic decision in the evening, which I try not to do, I take a nap. That is actually lately because I've been going through, in addition to some challenges in business and in finance, I'm also going through challenges in my personal life. So I've been taking a lot of intentional cognitive resets and strategic naps to regulate my nervous system. So decision batching. So, and also the good thing with decision batching too is, like I said earlier, you don't have all that residue. Our brain is very finite. So it can't context switch like a computer or an AI agent. So in order to do that, I batch certain things. Like if I'm gonna do content, I'm just sitting and doing content. When that time frame is done, that loop is closed. If I have more content or things to do, I set that for another date and time. Then I go to schoolwork. Oh, and that's the other thing. I'm in school full time. So I'm in graduate school. So if I have schoolwork to do, I set days where, okay, this is the time I'm going to do my schoolwork. That is it. I'm not setting any other times to do anything else. Then I make sure I have protected thinking blocks. Those are non-negotiable. So that way I have time to be more creative. I have more tolerance for ambiguity. I can be more curious because before I had a get it done mentality. I was definitely immersed in the hustle culture and I was not, like I said, I was busy but not effective. And then digital boundaries, which I'm still working on. I'm getting better. I have alarms set. So usually an hour and 10 minutes before my scheduled bedtime, I will start shutting down like TV and stuff like that, which I don't even have time to watch that much anymore. But I use Blu-ray blockers because I have a digital journal and I do journal before I go to bed. And I look at I have a personal and a business dashboard. I usually look at my personal dashboard at night before I go to bed to make sure that the priority things that I wanted to accomplish was accomplished. So I put on my Blu-ray blocker glasses so it doesn't go against the melatonin, because as the sun goes down and the moon is rising, melatonin, which is a hormone, naturally rises in the body. But Blu-rays from our devices actually will fight against it. They have a very antagonistic relationship. So because of that, that's the purpose of the Blu-ray blocker glasses, ambient lighting. Those things help with signaling to the body that it's time to start powering down for the night. Leadership today isn't limited by intelligence. It is limited by attention. And we have to remember that energy flows where attention goes. So the organizations that thrive won't necessarily have leaders with greater clarity. I want to leave you with one question to ponder this week. What is one commitment you'll remove this week to create more strategic thinking space? I'm going to repeat that again. What's one commitment you'll remove this week to create more strategic thinking space? Because I'm in school full time, because I have a business, because I still work, I am easily moving things out of the way to create thinking space. Before we wrap up, take a moment to reflect on what stood out most in today's conversation. Leadership performance isn't built in dramatic moments. It's shaped by the small systems you practice every day. So if today's episode resonated with you, you'll find several resources in the show notes to help you go deeper. That includes the Executive Capacity Audit, which helps leaders evaluate the biological and cognitive factors influencing their performance, and the Executive Longevity Community, which is a private leadership community for executives, business leaders, and professionals who are committed to sustaining high performance without sacrificing their health, resilience, or purpose. Through evidence-based education, expert conversations, practical tools, and a network of like-minded leaders, members learn strategies to optimize cognitive performance, strengthen resilience, enhance well-being, and build the habits that support long-term development. And right now, we're finalizing the last couple of weeks of the Executive Longevity Lab, which I run for 45 days. The next cohort will start after Labor Day, the week after Labor Day. I can't remember the exact date, but it's in September. But inside the group, we have challenges or things that we focus on when we're not focusing on different things inside the lab. So the rest of August, it's going to be focused on cognitive load and strategic clarity and how we can maintain our strategic clarity and decrease our cognitive load so we can be more efficient, effective leaders. And if you or your leadership team are ready to elevate performance, build long-term resilience, and develop a sustainable strategy for executive longevity, I invite you to book an executive longevity strategy call with me. And together we'll create a roadmap that helps leaders thrive today while preparing for tomorrow. If this episode helped you think differently about leadership and longevity, consider sharing it with another leader who might benefit from the conversation. And if you haven't already, follow the show so you don't miss future episodes. Episodes drop every Sunday. So until next time, protect your energy, clarity, and lead for the long term.